Good afternoon, blog viewers. We'll return to the virtues of freedom and authenticity today, talk more about authenticity, and to summarize some of the various threads in our earlier posts on this issue. To be authentic is to be at bottom different in a very significant way from everyone around you now and everyone that has come before you. Now, you must still do this, and the ideal state is cultivating this authenticity, cultivating this difference, while still remaining a decent person, maintaining contact with the human genotype, with the human form, the mean state of humanity, whatever way you want to put it. I think that phrase means a lot of very common things to many people. And the effort to maintain, or the effort to cultivate authenticity, has to always be embedded within the maintaining contact with the human genotype and the human mean. To become authentic requires you to not put much weight, as we saw in Nietzsche, with most secondhand thought, secondhand learning, and sort of secondhand action. You must sort of find your own routes, our own routes of reaching different conclusions, and perhaps at times the same conclusions as what secondhand action and secondhand learning and secondhand thoughts would require you to do. These must be sort of your own particular routes of reaching whatever answers or whatever actions or thoughts that you reach. They must be your own routes. And most importantly, because of that, an authentic person must always avoid intellectual laziness of some sort or another. Not on every issue in the world, of course. If we don't all have time to learn every issue or everything, but into the core aspects of our personality, our core beliefs, the things that we believe about what's good for us, our dominant commitments. Those commitments cannot be supported by sort of various shortcuts or aphorisms, or sort of received wisdom that we've received from others that we haven't really thought through and sort of articulated strong reasons for believing one way or the other, or being committed to one way or the other. So the authentic person must in many ways avoid sort of that intellectual laziness that just takes other people's ideas of what's good, and other people's ideas of what we should spend most of our time doing, other people's ideas of what failure and success mean, other people's ideas of what growth means for a human being. All of these things cannot be accepted by an authentic person based on secondhand thought and secondhand learning. These things, these questions, these concerns, these problems must all be worked out individually by an authentic person. The authentic person, again, never piggybacks on the difficult intellectual labor of others. He may reference it, he may rely on it in some way or other, but he's doing it to build his own thoughts and to extrapolate his own intellectual sort of architecture, rather than just piggybacking upon something that's been completed. But of course, here we have an important point to make here, an important thing to stress. Merely sort of rejecting all secondhand thought and action is not enough to become authentic. If a human being were to do nothing but simply reject and protest endlessly the injustices of the world, he would have no positive doctrines of his own. He would have no sort of, his identity would always be oppositionally framed and directed by what he dislikes and what he's criticizing. But there's nothing that he loves. There's nothing that he's sort of trying to build new beauty and new conceptions of human beauty, new thoughts about how a human life can be beautiful and all those things. There's no positive contribution being made there. I think we saw this in, again, Nietzsche, when he talked about someone that endlessly criticizes, sort of has sort of disgust at the world at the tip of his tongue. It's sort of just foaming there, remaining there, sort of disgust and anger and bitter and sort of critical of everything in the world. Such persons, again, cannot be authentic. Why do we say that? Why can such a person not become authentic simply by criticizing things around him? And I think the point is that that's been done before. Many people have today still criticized everything around them. Many people have done that in the past. Many people have endlessly criticized human life and the way people live. And again, to quote Nietzsche here, this is from his Twilight of the Idols essay. Nietzsche writes, "In every age, the wisest have passed the identical judgment on life. It is worthless. Everywhere and always their mouths have uttered the same sound, a sound full of doubt, full of melancholy, full of weariness of life, full of resistance to life." So an authentic person must have positive theories or doctrines of his own about human good and human life that are significantly different from everyone living at the time and those that preceded him. Those doctrines must in some sense describe life as being positive, as being beautiful, as being worth living for, as worth striving very hard to achieve certain things. And the authentic person in doing all this can draw on the past, does not have to sort of engage in a tabula rasa attempt to reinterpret the world and everything, but he must still bring a sort of a new perspective, a new energy, a new dynamism to any sort of discussion of past thought, any discussion of past received wisdom or accepted values. The mere regurgitation of past thought or past ways of doing things do not create authenticity. I think one way to think of that would be to think about in the future we could have a computer, certain computers that just summarize and perfectly cite or describe past human thought. And this computer would just continue to be better and better at summarizing, but still no one would say that computer is an authentic creature. No one would say that computer has reached sort of authentic levels of human personality or human freedom. And so I think that's one of the key differences. Now, by doing this sort of thing for a very long time, in a brutally self-critical, brutally self-aware, brutally self-honest fashion, person engaging in this kind of activity of authenticity will gradually have a sort of a sixth very keen sense of what is inauthentic in his actions, thoughts, and statements. Once that sense has been developed, he will continue to sort of excise those, eliminate or reduce that inauthenticity in his character, because again he's developed such a good sense of it. Each such discovery, of course, of inauthenticity in the soul and in the character of a human being is not a pleasant thing, but still, because this person has the ever striving, ever reaching toward more perfection, ever striving toward more authenticity, the initial unpleasantness of the discovery of the inauthenticity in the self is just a momentary setback to greater and greater levels of self-perfection. It's not a setback that will stop this person. This person will continue on discovering and excising inauthenticity. And because he's so good, or because this person is so good at detecting inauthenticity in himself, he will also be very good in detecting inauthenticity in other people around him. He can, as it were, sort of sniff and smell inauthenticity in others, and he will sort of, or he or she will sort of grimace, I think, because when he comes into contact with someone that is very inauthentic. Of course, we all have levels of inauthenticity, but this person will sort of grimace when he sees or interacts with someone that is extremely inauthentic, because he will, again, that sense of inauthenticity has been developed so much that one can't sort of bear to be around people that are extremely inauthentic. So from everything we've said so far, it should be clear that the cultivation of authenticity is, first of all, very rare, and second of all, very difficult. Various social forces acting on us always that sort of try to push us toward sort of inauthentic ways of being, toward the mean state of being that's most conducive to sort of a stable human society and human life. these forces continue to push and continue to threaten the authenticity that we have in exchange for other goods. It's not necessarily that these forces are evil in any sense. It's just that these forces have been, these social forces operating upon us are created and maintained in an effort to create sort of a stable human life for most people. There's no sort of great interest in the individual uniqueness of each person. The social forces are mainly operating in a way to just smoothly bring about a social life that sort of coheres well and works for most people. But these forces are usually antagonistic to the cultivation of an authentic personality and authentic being. And many of us are sort of unaware of these forces. It's not like they're labeled as such. Inauthentic or authenticity crushing social force is about to hit you or something like that. Nothing of the sort. These things often have actually they have their own virtues. These forces, they have their own benefits that seem positive, but in any event, the task of continuing to focus on authenticity and locating it will over time reveal these things for what they are, and one will have a correct appreciation of what forces are authenticity promoting and what forces around us are authenticity debilitating. So far, I think we can say the discussion has been very abstract. It's derived in part from many sources, some of the doctrines of Nietzsche, some of the writings of Alexander Nehamas, Spinoza, to some extent Plato, less so Plato. But what does all of this mean? What does all of this mean for a specific individual person looking to live an authentic life? How can we see these sort of abstract philosophical ideas and principles? How can we see these? How can this stuff be translated into a human personality and concrete actions that we can actually understand and understand better? And I think to do this, again, we have to turn to literature. Literature, we get characters acting out, we get the details, we see choices being made, we see reactions, we see various statements and comments, we see people grappling with very difficult choices. And so in literature, I think we gain a lot more color, a lot more perspective, a lot more depth in the philosophical, to sort of complete out and sort of buttress the philosophical ideas. And so we'll turn to literature today to get some of that. And we're going to look at Chekhov again, Anton Chekhov, short story, My Life. A quick summary of the story. I think we've blogged about Chekhov before. I want to say just a couple things about his stories. He often wrote in a way that he did not actually enjoy moralizing in that sense. He believed that as a writer, his task was merely to report life and to report at what human actions and report what he saw in all their complexity. He did not at all like writing about things that were very superficial or stories that were very far-fetched, various fairy tales or just stories, sort of fantasy stories that just never happened in day-to-day life. He actually liked focusing on a very particular context of people's lives and focusing on the characters. And he usually liked to end his stories sort of ambiguously. There's not necessarily always a clear resolution, and there's not necessarily clear answers provided to the questions he's answering. He once was quoted as saying that at the end of the story, his aim was to sort of punch the reader in the face, in some sense, to sort of awaken him. Now, that wasn't sort of an aggressive impulse, but that was sort of his view, and also I think Kafka said something very similar, that the aim of good literature should not just be to make us feel good about ourselves and how we're living, but it should be to sort of unsettle us in certain ways about how we're living and to raise questions for us about whether we can live better. Now, in short summary, My Life is the story of a young guy by the name of Misail, and he is a 25-year-old guy that is he's a son of a well-to-do architect, and he lives in a small provincial town in Russia. He's from the upper class, but he detests many of the sort of standard office jobs and the like that many people in the upper class are sort of pushed toward. He wants to pursue a life of manual labor. He thinks that is the better way to cultivate the virtue in his character and develop a strong moral personality. His father hates this about him. His father sort of endlessly entreats him to just continue to be like everyone else in the family and continue to pursue this sort of the upper class existence that he's had. But he resists that. He becomes a painter. He lives in he goes and paints against his father's wishes. While he's painting, he meets his wife, and they both decide to buy an estate where they can both become farmers. They have various peasants that help them farm, but they're not very good at farming. The peasants cheat them. The wife tries to open up a school for the peasants, but she fails in that too. The wife ultimately divorces him, Misail, and goes to America. Misail's sister dies, but not before having a child, which Misail raises. His father ultimately never forgives him for not pursuing sort of the standard path of other well-to-do kids in his town, and the story sort of ends sort of unresolved at that point. Now, in many ways, I would argue, and I think we'll see this, Misail is sort of a paragon of authenticity, while still always remaining a very decent person. He is a very rare creature that is an authentically decent person. And I think we see this, the key to literature always is in the details of the particular characters' choices, statements they make, emotional reactions to things that are happening in the story. And what the details show us in my life is Misail as a supreme character of authenticity and also decency. He repeatedly stands his ground when under attack from his father, from others. There was a governor of a town that he was working in that the father asked the governor to sort of ask him to come back and to continue pursuing sort of the upper class way of life. And at every turn, Misail sort of rejects that. His father threatens to disown him, to write him out of his will. It doesn't matter to Misail. He continues to work as a painter, continues to do what he thinks is right. He's asked repeatedly again to give up the sort of labor of a painting for something quote grander, but refuses, saying again that he's living according to his conscience. In another sense, you can see his authenticity. His eye sort of instinctively detects the inauthentic all around him. When other characters around him stand up and give various speeches in favor of being a virtuous person, Misail always sort of senses that there is sort of no conviction in their voice. When his sister decides to become an actor in a play, he immediately notices that she's trying to sort of play a part that doesn't fit with her character. Ultimately, he's right. She faints while trying to recite a few lines that she was given a very small role. Beyond even this, when one of the other characters, an engineer in the story, proclaims that civilized life has not begun in Russia, Misail sort of responds. He doesn't grasp the meaning of what he's saying. Again, it feels like this character sort of inauthentic, is sort of just repeating these words but doesn't really believe them. He recognizes the inauthenticity in his father, who's the only architect of note in a small town. Misail notices that every house his father builds is always the same, over and over again. There's literally the same plan is used for every home for 15-20 years. He's perceptive enough to realize that. When he's working at various jobs, I think he has 9 office jobs, he becomes frustrated with each job because he says to him, each job seemed, quote, and I'm quoting here, as like as one drop of water is to another. In each job, Misail has to, quote, sit, write, listen to rude or stupid observations, sit in a stuffy room, to copy, to compete with a typewriter, and so on. And he, again, he's self-reflective enough to notice that this is what's going on in these jobs, and that this is not sort of promoting any sort of authenticity in his character. Third, he works very hard to attain sort of an authentic moral personality, and he does that by pursuing sort of a lot of reading, sort of critical reflection, a lot of study. He's aiming at purifying his sort of moral conscience, and he does this in a very, very serious way. I'm quoting here, he has certain conversations with Dr. Blagovo, who is sort of prides himself on his intellectual readings and sort of intellectual thoughts. And after these conversations, Misail says, seeing him and reading the books he gave me, I became little by little to feel a thirst for knowledge which would have given significance to my cheerless labor. It seems strange to me, for instance, that I had not known till then that the whole world was made up of 60 elements. I had not known what oil was, what paints were, and that I could have gone on without knowing these things. My acquaintance with the doctor elevated me morally, too. I was continually arguing with him, and though I usually remained of my own opinion, yet thanks to him, I began to perceive that everything was not clear to me. It's key right there. I began to perceive that everything was not clear to me, and I began trying to work out as far as I could definite convictions in myself, that the dictates of conscience might be definite, and that there might be nothing vague in my mind. So Misail is a character that is working for sort of definite convictions in himself, definite authenticity in himself. He doesn't want things to be sort of vague in his mind on key questions. He says later that when things did not go well with the farm, that he was trying to build with his wife, he says, we have been sincere from the beginning to end, and if anyone is sincere, he is right. So he's again prizing the importance not of results, but of the authentic development of character, authentic development of moral conscience, and authentic striving toward acting in ways that are consistent with ideas he's developed in his moral conscience. Another way that we can see sort of Misail's authenticity is he does not think and feel about other people in the ways that are customarily accepted and standard in the community. His wife continues to cuss out the various peasants for getting drunk, for lying, for stealing from them, for living like, quote, animals. But every time he hears these things, Misail doesn't adopt these views. He comes to see the peasants, despite their sort of drunkenness and foolishness at times, as still having sort of authentic moral fiber. He says that they believe that the most important thing in the world was a belief in truth and justice, and that the salvation of the entire world depended on the attainment of truth and justice. He says, I told my wife she saw the spots on the glass, but not the glass itself. So his wife was able to see what was most apparent, see what was easiest to see, the sort of the defects in the peasant's character, the spots on the glass. But because Misail is authentic, because he does not view things the same way as other people, he sees not just the spots on the glass, but he sees the entire glass. And because he sees the entire glass, he sees virtues, and he sees beauty, and he sees good things in the peasants that most people wouldn't see. And despite all this authenticity, he remains, despite cultivating all this authenticity, he doesn't go the route of sort of leaving the mean and sort of prizing his authenticity so much that he becomes sort of bitter and sort of self-righteous or difficult to deal with or just mean or pompous. He at all times remains a very decent person despite cultivating this authenticity. He says that he believes human progress lies in deeds of love, in fulfilling the moral law. When he works as a painter, he refuses to go along with everyone else and ask for tips or steal oil from the customers that he's painting. He never argues with his coworkers at all. He pursues romantic love very intensely and very sincerely and very devotedly in pursuing his wife as his wife both before they're married and afterwards. I want to quote here. whether I was walking along the street or working or talking to the other fellows, I was all the time thinking of one thing only, of going in the evening to see Maria Viktorovna, and was picturing her voice, her laugh, her movements. Later he says, everything Masha, this is his wife, said to me seemed extraordinarily clever and fine. This was the happiest time of my life. So while becoming an authentic person, he's still deeply in love, deeply devoted to his wife, despite the fact that she ultimately leaves him. But he, again, maintains that sort of decent character, this decent personality all throughout, while reaching ever greater levels of authenticity, ever greater levels of freedom in the process. Now, of course, I think in the end, as we saw in the summary, various bad things happened to Misail. His father basically disowns him. The relationship is punctured and damaged very deeply. His sister dies. His wife deserts him, and obviously he gives up sort of the various prestige and power and money that he could have had living sort of an upper-class existence. And to all this, I think Chekhov doesn't sort of romanticize, as he was loath to often do, does not romanticize the pursuit of virtue and authenticity. Doesn't present it as sort of a magic cure-all for everything that'll solve every problem, or that'll make one's life go limitlessly smoothly and happy. There are times where Misail certainly suffers and endures terrible things and feels terrible about what is happening to him, and then of course his wife deserting him. But I think in the end of the story, and I think as much as Chekhov associates with this character, I think despite all those bad things, I think in the end Chekhov presents the Misail's pursuit of authenticity, pursuit of freedom, as being of almost limitless value, despite all the bad things that happen. I think for Chekhov, in this story and in this character, where we have an authentic person but also a decent person, that these other things that happened, while unfortunate, still in no way sort of diminished or sullied the beauty of Misail's life. I think at the end we see sort of in section 20 of the story, and I'm going to read this quote and end the post right here. But I think we see Chekhov speaking very clearly as to what ultimately Misail gained from his pursuit of authenticity. Chekhov writes here, if I wanted, and this is Misail speaking, if I wanted to order a ring for myself, the inscription I should choose would be, "Nothing passes away." I believe that nothing passes away without leaving a trace, and that every step we take, however small, has significance for our present and our future existence. What I have been through has not been for nothing. My great troubles, my patience, have touched people's hearts, and now they don't call me better than nothing. They don't laugh at me. And when I walk by the shops, they don't throw water over me. They have grown used to my being a workman, and see nothing strange in my carrying a pail of paint and putting in windows, though I am of noble rank. On the contrary, people are glad to give me orders, and I am now considered a first-rate workman. People are civil to me, they address me politely, and in the houses where I work, they offer me tea, and send to inquire whether I wouldn't like dinner. Children and young girls often come and look at me with curiosity and compassion. And I think there we see again, despite all that happened to him, Misail says very clearly that every step, every striving toward freedom and authenticity had significance for him, for his present and his future existence, and that despite all the bad things that happened, he gained so much in the process, and he developed sort of this identity in self that he's proud. He can now walk by the shops. There's sort of there's a pride in his heart. There's a pride in how he sort of now his role in the social community. He sort of occupies that role and plays it very well now. And I think all of that could only come about from Nisar's intense pursuit of authenticity. So with that, we'll end today's post. Bye-bye.